It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars show, and on this week's episode, Disney looks towards the future. More live-action content, less live-action content, more movies, less movies. We may all find out the answer to that soon. Qui Gon Gin says too much is too much. Are we going back to Naboo? I kind of hope so. Plus, we have your listener feedback. As always, if you want to support My Nerd World and the podcasts that are produced through My Nerd World, go to mynerdworld.net or amazon.com and look for EMBARK, Jon Justice, and check out the science fiction space opera series for yourself. Right now, let's get to this week's episode. Glad you're here.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
It is My Nerd World, a Star Wars show. I am your host, Jon Justice. I am glad that you are with the show once again this week. Before we dive into the main discussions, topics on the show this week, Hollywood Reporter has a rather interesting article we'll dive through about Disney and the future of Star Wars on Disney Plus and the films. Qui Gon Gin, Liam Neeson says too much is too much. Also, a really interesting report about some filming taking place in a rather famed location that could signal a return to Naboo for one of the stories. I'll give you my guess on which one that I think it is. So, to start the show off, though, let me just talk briefly about The Bad Batch. Once again, I enjoyed this episode, The Crossing. Really looking forward to next week, spoiler alert, seeing that the Marauder was stolen. I was honestly, my love for ships, that bummed me out, was much like when the Razor Crest got blown up in The Mandalorian. Although I'm very happy with The Mandalorian's replacement, by the way, and I can't wait to see it in action here in a couple of weeks when Season 3 of The Mandalorian kicks off. But I was bummed that the Marauder got stolen, and I thought it would be returned by the end of the episode. So again, I'm going to talk spoilers here. It seemed a little odd to me that whoever stole, there was very little attention put on whoever stole the Marauder in the episode. They just kind of rolled up. We didn't see its face and they took off. So I kind of had an anticipation that perhaps the ship would be found at the end when they arrived at the spaceport that was abandoned, thinking that perhaps this person needed it for for their own legitimate purposes. They stole it, and we're going to return it. So I hope, again, we get it back. So I'm looking forward to seeing next week. But I enjoyed the episode. It was filler, doing that thing with my fingers. We're not really expanding on any sort of larger plot point. But it was a good episode. Enjoyed watching it with the family. I love these characters. You know how much, if you listened to the show before, how much I love Omega. And I would love just an Omega show. But we get the Bad Batch, and I'm fine. I'm fine with that. But again, very much looking forward to The Mandalorian coming up and continuing to watch this. But I'm not really getting anything more than that. And this speaks to what I want to talk about on the show this week, based off of a couple different articles. One from Variety and a lengthier one from the Hollywood Reporter. So let's get into the news for this week.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
I will only speak for me, and I'm changing my tune a bit based off of commentary that I've done on this very show in the past. And I can't believe I'm actually going to say it. But I feel like we're getting some Star Wars fatigue. I think in my opinion, it's tied to, again, this is very, very subjective, but in my opinion, this is tied to the fact that we haven't had a film and we haven't had something larger that the Star Wars fandom as a collective can really come together and discuss. There's something very different about a movie on the big screen and the way that reaches society on a number of different levels. There's something about getting up and going out and doing something and being in a place, even though you may never speak with any of the other individuals in the theater, you know that they're there for the same reason you are. It's very much like going to a rock concert. I've been, as I mentioned on last week's episode, I've been really focusing on doing my weekly Depeche Mode podcast because they have this new music coming out and they're going on tour. And as I interact with the fandom of Depeche Mode fans, I'm beginning to see the comparisons to the Star Wars fandom and how important it is to go out and do things together, even if it's with a bunch of strangers that you never go and talk to. I wish that there was some way we could return to and I'm going to sound like an old curmudgeon here. I wish to we, but the experience of going to a Blockbuster and seeing a movie, you have like different layers, right? The I guess experience is the only word. I'm trying to find a different word, but going out to a video store, there's like levels, right? Going out to a video store, you're there with other people, with humanity for a purpose, to find a movie to be entertained by. There's a sense of closeness that comes with that. There's a sense of belonging. We're so disconnected as a society right now through our phones, it just doesn't have the same impact. It's like covering up your face like we all had to do. You disconnect from society. So, as it relates to Star Wars, that's why I think the films are so important. Because you just don't get that interaction with people online and on social networking like you do when you go out physically to a place, when you make the effort to get into the car and drive to the location, all the decisions that go along with enhancing the enjoyment of this singular experience. That's why I think it's so important for Star Wars to be up on the big screen, and why I personally believe they need to move away from the streaming aspect of it and begin to pull back somewhat on the content. Liam Neeson in Variety gets asked, according to the article here, in almost every interview, if he would reprise his role as Jedi Master of Qui Gon Gin in Star Wars. The answer is often no. And such was the case when Neeson joined Paul Rudd on the February 16th episode of Watch What Happens Live. But Neeson took things a step further, explaining that his reason for not wanting to reprise Qui Gon Jinn again is because the Star Wars franchise is damaging its own magic. No, I'm not, Neeson said when he asked if he's interested in returning. There's so many spin-offs of Star Wars. It's diluting me, and it's taking away from the mystery and the magic in a weird way. I agree with him. I think it is. Even if you just had a year between projects, you get this chance to breathe. We will have nonstop Star Wars on our television screens from now to the end of the year. We're going to Bad Batch. We're going to go into The Mandalorian. We've got Ahsoka coming up later in the year. It's going to be nonstop. And while this Star Wars fan always loves new Star Wars, looking at the bigger picture of what is this going to do to the franchise, I don't think it's going to grow it. I think it's going to segment it more. Now, that could be unavoidable in the society that we live in right now, with the constant need to drive sales, to bring in dollars, and the way that it's segmented, where one entity can't bring in enough. For example, Bad Batch wouldn't be enough to continue to increase subscriptions to Disney+. Mandalorian maybe, but even then you might have a point of diminishing returns. And this gets back to the importance of box office in the movies and how much money those movies make comparing to the production cost for a streaming show, a live-action streaming show on Disney Plus, and what does each subscriber mean in terms of a monetary value, and I don't want to get into all of that. But the movies generate a lot more money. And right now, with this constant stream of Star Wars stuff coming out, I think the fandom just gets more and more segmented, and it does lose a little bit of the magic. Now, according to The Hollywood Reporter, perhaps they're going to be rethinking all of this. Call it a franchise recession. After years of Marvel and Star Wars movies and shows inundating screens, big and small, Disney is putting the brakes on the output of some of its biggest franchises and brands following Bob Iger's February 8th comments that the company needs to be better at curating franchise content that's extraordinarily expensive. Iger went on to say, "We want the quality on the screen, but we have to look at what they cost us." The directive to rein in costs and output arrives as Disney prepares to release Marvel's Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania on February 17th. I'm going to get back to that, by the way. I saw Quantumania. The comparisons to Star Wars were odd. I'll share that with you coming up in just a moment. No spoilers. But it was okay. It was the better of the MCU movies that I've seen as of late. Certainly better than I think anything that I saw in Phase 4. Is this the start of Phase 5? But even I'm feeling a bit of MCU fatigue as well. And as The Mandalorian Season 3 awaits its March 1st Disney Plus debut, Marvel is Disney's most important supplier of product, the subsidiary with the highest output. And under Iger's directive, it could feel cuts the soonest. There's going to be a level of rigor on Marvel and across the entire company. One company insider said, "Numbers matter now, and costs are going to be outlined and enforced." Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige echoed the new direction. He said, "At the pace at which we're putting out Disney Plus shows will change." He told Entertainment Weekly, noting that there will be fewer shows and that they will be more spaced out. Now, Star Wars, the article goes on to say, is facing an opposite challenge. After being absent from the big screen since 2019 and having had false starts with Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron, which may never materialize, Disney has ramped up its efforts to return the franchise to theaters. Damon Lindelof led a writer's room in July to hash out a story for a feature, and Taika Waititi is still apparently developing his own take on the franchise. Disney is expected to unveil film plans at Star Wars Celebration in April in London. On top of Season 3 of The Mandalorian, shows expected to hit the streaming service this year include Ahsoka, starring Rosario Dawson, the John Watts-produced Skeleton Crew. Lucas may ramp up, but it will have to abide by the same fiscal discipline as the rest of the company, says the insider. Observers are calling it a massive correction from only a few years ago when the entertainment industry was hell-bent on giving consumers endless amounts to watch and spending endlessly in doing so. You can have 10 mediocre shows or you can have 5 great shows, says one agency partner whose clients work on the franchise plays. People will stay on Disney Plus. The pullback on Disney Plus is coming amid an industry-wide shift in rethinking the best possible way to achieve profitability in streaming. Adds one producer working on multiple projects around town, every studio and streamer is being forced to behave fiscally responsibly. This is a welcome change in my opinion. While I love Star Wars content, I will watch Star Wars content. I have made it known my disappointment with a lot of Star Wars content. And listen, even in my opinion, look, I love Andor. I thought Andor was great. But as I've mentioned before, Andor's not something that, and again, it's all subjective, but Andor is not something that I think I'm going to be returning to for a rewatch. I rewatched the second half of the season recently because my oldest son, Logan, hadn't seen it and still really enjoyed it, but it doesn't have that same magic of mythology that Lucas created with that original trilogy and that continued with the prequels and, in my opinion, the sequel trilogy as well. Love or hate those sequels, they are still topics of discussion. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bring it up here in just a moment. And they are larger topics of discussion because, in my opinion, and I could be way off on this, because of that collective experience. People are more invested in the movies because they have to invest more in the movies. And I don't want to turn this into a rant that's typically reserved for my weekly radio show. However, there is something about going out and physically doing something. And people are more attached and have more stake when they're going out and doing something. When you are going into your phone, into your movie app, your Fandango or your AMC, you are consciously making a choice to go and see this movie. You are planning out your day around a predetermined time to go to the theater. You're bringing items with you, or you're buying items to enjoy while you watch the film. You're picking your seats. You're there with other people. It's not just, you don't do any of that when you're streaming. You just sit down and watch it whenever you have time and you want to. You might plan it out with family, but it's a lot easier. So you don't have nearly as much invested in it. And I think that that has a major impact on commentary, on the fandom, and whether the product is received good or bad. You're going to see a more passionate fandom commenting on it and speculating on it when it's something that's on the big screen because of what I just mentioned, everything that you've invested into it. Now, who knows if my commentary plays into any of what is in the thinking of what Disney Plus, Lucasfilm, Disney are planning on doing with the franchise. But you can really burn out when you are just pumping things out on streaming, and then the commentary is just getting thrown up and, online for people to read, and you get echo chambers, and it doesn't do anything. It's not as healthy. So I'm glad to see them heading this direction. I'm really interested to see what comes up in April and what their decision is in terms of films. And I really hope, as we get into some of the rumors this week, I really hope that we get a return to less Star Wars content. I'm not saying years in between. I know that works really well when it comes to the films, but even a year in between particular projects is enough to sort of breathe. It's funny, again, going back to music and Depeche Mode, I was looking at sort of the timeline of when the band in their first decade, they were releasing an album like every year, but I remember at that age, it seemed like a lifetime. Now they wait like 4 years, and so when the new music comes out, oh my gosh, and by example, I mean, the fandom and my other podcast has just erupted in popularity because of the scarcity of it. I don't think Star Wars needs to go to that length, but at least fewer projects, better quality, put things back on the big screen, get some distance between everything, and make sure that you've put your best foot forward in doing these projects. All right. I don't want this conversation to fall apart any more than it already has, so let's move on to some rumors.
Spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
So I'm looking at a tweet from, this is from Star Wars Covered. I've never seen this particular account before. They are reporting on what MakingStarWars.net reported, and I actually watched this video earlier this week. A Star Wars project, we don't know which one, is planning a shoot featuring a lot of background performers at Hever Castle in Kent this summer. That location was previously used for the Theed Royal Palace on Naboo in a deleted scene from The Phantom Menace. Making Star Wars says that they're leaning toward Andor. I honestly think unless filming has wrapped up on the Acolyte would make sense based off of what we know about that show and how it is supposed to be showing the beginnings of how the Sith infiltrated the Senate, the Republic, heading into a Phantom Menace. So that would make sense to me. I kind of hope that it's for the new Star Wars film. I would have loved, while I loved The Rise of Skywalker, I would have loved a more well-rounded conclusion to The Rise of Skywalker, including a trip back to Naboo. I would have ended the movie on Naboo instead of Tatooine. That made more sense to me. Of having Rey, considering that The Rise of Skywalker was Carrie Fisher and Leia's movie, doing that thing with my fingers, that was supposed to be the focus of it, how important her role was in The Rise of Skywalker to go all the way back to the birthplace of her, or the home of her mother, made the most sense to me. And I think it would have had more weight as it relates to, Leia being on Alderaan in the Kenobi show, knowing sort of the dynamics of what ended up placing her there with the Organas. But that's what I would have liked to have seen. I would have liked to have seen Rey gone to Naboo and truly wrap up the Skywalker story with where it actually started chronologically in the storytelling. But of course, that didn't happen. So I would love to see Naboo return on the big screen, and I don't know what the dynamics would be for that. My guess is, making Star Wars is probably correct. Andor makes sense given the political dynamics of what's taking place in that and sort of expectations for season 2. But I also think that, the Acolyte is possible as well. So I think it'll be cool. Anything that goes back to the prequel trilogy. I mean, I just, there's a new love for the prequel trilogy. It speaks to the aging of the fandom, and the fandom now in adulthood that was raised on, and their first exposure to Star Wars was the prequel trilogy, much like the first exposure to Star Wars for me as a 5-year-old was the original trilogy. Those movies mean a lot for that generation. And it speaks a bit to that theory that I was a number of podcasts ago, but somebody had talked about, Star Wars works best generationally with sort of a series of films and then a gap of like a decade in between that brings back that level of hype right now. You just don't have the hype anymore like you used to. I know that I don't. And maybe it's me. Again, I want to make sure that I continue to stress how this is subjective. That maybe just me, like, while I'm really looking forward to The Mandalorian, I'm not finding myself combing through every little aspect of trailers that get released like I used to before, because I was always clamoring to see more and new Star Wars. Well, I get it every single week because we have Bad Batch going right now. So that's feeding my Star Wars gland. That's giving me my dopamine hits. All right, before we move over to listener feedback, I want to make one comment about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Specifically, I won't get into the details of the movie, but specifically these comparisons to Star Wars, I didn't quite see what everybody was talking about unless they were talking about something they didn't talk about. Who's on first? I don't know. Third base. Congratulations to those that got that reference. So what I mean by that is there were moments in the movie, and they actually showed it in the trailer, where you did get kind of Cantina vibes. There was a Star Wars vibe to it based off of the unique aliens and characters in the film. But I've heard from multiple, like completely separate pop culture reporting, podcasts and articles, this comparison to Star Wars. But nobody ever says directly what it is. So I watched the film. The only conclusion that I can come to, which I thought was really interesting, was The Rise of Skywalker. The end of the film has this Rise of Skywalker echo. Now, if that's what people were referring to, okay, I get it. But it's funny because nobody ever specifically says what it is. Which makes me think that it's The Rise of Skywalker, but nobody wants to bring up that film because it's too taboo, because there's a portion of the fandom that still complains about The Rise of Skywalker and The Last Jedi. When I was watching Quantumania, at the end of the film, I went, oh, well, that's a lot like The Rise of Skywalker, but nobody has said that outright. So now I'm saying it outright. So if you see the movie, I'm curious if you picked up on that as well. leave an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or a comment up on YouTube.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, just a couple of emails this week. First one comes from N Black. Have you ever been to Galaxy's Edge, John? No, I haven't. I'm hoping to go this year. I am a horrible Star Wars fan, but I've been stuck in this frozen wasteland for 6 years, and I've only been able to travel out of the state once since I've been here. So I'm really hoping I get to Galaxy's Edge this year. I've done multiple walkthroughs while using the elliptical machine on both Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland and at Walt Disney World. It looks amazing, and I can't wait to go. They go on to write, my wife and daughters surprised me for my birthday and booked a trip there. Wow, that's awesome. I would love a surprise buy like that. We did the lightsaber build and went to the Rise of the Resistance as well as Smuggler's Run. I had a blast. Going there seems to have reinvigorated my love of Star Wars. I even splurged on a few legacy lightsabers. I would recommend it. Yeah, I hope to go this year. I really, really do. I can't believe that I haven't been yet. Princess Cupcakes writes, going back to what you were saying, John, about how the original trilogy might have been received by fans if social media had been around then, obviously loved and hated are in the eye of the beholder, and there are always ways, there will always be ways people who don't like what it is to be done with I'm reading this inappropriately, and there will always be people who don't like what is done with the story. My bad. I'm a touch dyslexic today. And there will always be people who don't like what is done with the story. But I think it hit different with the sequels. As someone who didn't mind the sequels at first, I understand why people hate it. I read a comment where someone said the sequel trilogy could be summed up in one sentence. 3 generations of Skywalkers fought, suffered, and died so that the descendant of their enemy could take their name. How do you not put the original trio all in a scene together even once? They made Han and Leia's only child the bad guy, and by the end of the trilogy, every Skywalker and Solo is dead. And then Rey, a grown woman, just decides to take the name. What an absolute unimaginative and tragic ending for such wonderful characters. I can understand why George Lucas said he lost control of Star Wars and it went off a different path than he intended. Looking back, I wish they just had made George's sequel. Thank you for the comment, Princess Cupcakes. I appreciate it. I will say, and as I've said many times on the show, I disagree. Now, what you laid out perhaps could be considered better storytelling. So again, I'm looking at this through a very subjective lens. This is really just about people's opinions. But the way that I view Star Wars and its content, as I've said many times, is more like historical documents. This is what happened. Clearly, when they were writing these stories in the sequel trilogy, they weren't thinking about it with such broad brushes of, okay, well, are we going to sum it up like that person that you referenced? Are we going to sum it up? And this is the outcome. Is this what we want? They wrote the stories that they felt were best to serve the story they wanted to tell, and that's what happened. What I like about that, as opposed to looking at the franchise and trying to come up with sort of a definitive, this makes the most sense from A to B, and there's no way that anybody can go and rip them apart because in the end this person is still alive or that person is dead. And okay, what I like about it is it's more true to real life, in my opinion, because real life is messy and things often don't go the way that you plan. That you plan. When you look at the stories as a whole, I mean, you could make an argument that they're more Palpatine story than they are anybody else's. In my opinion, the not putting the 3 characters from the original trilogy together in the sequel trilogy, it makes no difference to me. I don't personally care. We had our time with those characters in the original trilogy. We had those moments when they were all together at the end celebration of Return of the Jedi. It wasn't their story anymore, and people end up separating. And if you had done that, you also could have potentially had fans saying, "Oh, such fan service! Look, we have a hold shot on Han, Luke, and Leia and Chewbacca together on the screen. They just did that to appease the fandom. What fan service?" Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and everybody can make a choice about how they feel about certain things, and certainly you can too. I'm personally fine with the way that the whole thing played out, but it does go and sort of show the difficulty that content creators have in trying to make everyone happy, and the truth of the matter is you're just not going to be able to do that. So I'm excited to see what's in store for Star Wars in the future. I think it has gone off the rails a little bit. I think if you look at what's happened within Lucasfilm, when you look at what's happened, especially within Disney, I should say, not so much Lucasfilm, but you look at what's happened with Disney and just what an impact the past 4 years have had, 3 years have had on the world, it makes sense that things have gotten kind of messy within the Star Wars storytelling and within the content. Everybody seems to be trying to navigate a new path post everybody being locked behind doors and, you know, governments and societies being shut down, and that translates into entertainment as well in a society where we are further connected. It just means that we're further and further disconnected from each other as we're more connected via our computer systems, which I don't think is healthy. But I wish I could end on a happier note. Bad Batch was really good this past week. I'll end up on that. I really did enjoy Bad Batch. I'm looking forward to seeing if they get the Marauder back this week. And I really am looking forward to The Mandalorian season 3. I've enjoyed every season of The Mandalorian. I think it is the best live-action content that they have put out. And I have nothing but high expectations, and I have no problem having those expectations when it comes to Mandalorian Season 3 that kicks off here in a couple of weeks. So, all right, thank you so much for checking out the episode this week. As always, I appreciate it. If you want to support my nerd world, I hope you go check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. Great for 11 years old and older, but written for adults. All 7 books in the series Complete the Story are available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook, narrated by me. And again, Battle Planet, book 7 in the series audiobook is now available. mynerdworld.net or Amazon. I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. Yourself a fantastic week. I'm going to watch me some NASCAR, Daytona 500 this weekend. I'm very excited. Go Bowman. Talk to you soon. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.